Okay, we're going to get into a little deeper into work with clients, and then I'm going to ask you about your opinion of different situations and how to handle them. From a traditional perspective, in a practitioner-client relationship, it is the client's needs that are being met and not the practitioners. And practitioners are taught to set all of their needs aside
Mhm.
just to serve the client. So if a client comes to me, I learn that they have expertise in real estate, and I'm interested in real estate and want to get involved. It's not in my role as a practitioner to spend the session questioning them about real estate. Now, if I learn something along the way about real estate, that's fine, but
Mhm.
it's not the contract that I have in working with that client. Now, that's fairly obvious. I don't think anyone would disagree with what I just said, but it can get more subtle because from a holistic model, we know that actually the needs of both client and practitioner are being met in some way. So, for example, it may look like to the client that they want to go on and on in a session, say for 3 hours, but for me as a practitioner, it doesn't meet my needs to keep the time limits for an hour or 90 minutes or whatever it is. So I also have needs as a practitioner. I need to know that the person is committed to do the work. And we'll get into examples of this later on. But we know from a holistic perspective that we're doing a balance between our needs as a professional and the needs of the client. Now, sometimes I may inadvertently go off the track. I may get off on a tangent. And if I'm able to admit that I've gone a little too far or I haven't really been sensitive to the needs of the client, and I can admit that rather than having to be the perfect authority figure, I am helping create a new model of acceptance for that client, a new way of recognizing their needs and values are important, not just they should do everything the authority says. So, in this holistic model, we respect each other's authority. As a breath worker, I respect my authority to coach as best I can, but the breath workee has authority over their own body, and they have the final say about what they're going to accept and what's right for them. So even though I am respecting their authority over their own body and their own process, I'm also making an assessment about how integrated they are. So, for example, with someone who is fairly integrated, I may use techniques or may do some self disclosure that I wouldn't with someone who is less integrated. So, with someone who is fairly well integrated, I may give an example of how I have dealt or am dealing with an issue that they are. But someone who is not that well integrated, I may not do that because all of a sudden they think now they've got to take care of me. When you set up a contract now, you have to know that just by virtue of being a practitioner, you are an authority figure to that client. Even if they're much older than
Mhm.
you have authority over your knowledge of being a breath worker that and they don't have that expertise. So you have to respect your role and not misjudge and think that how you behave won't be seen as the authority and the way things should be in that person's life because they may project a lot more authority on you or a lot more sense of knowledge or rightness or whatever it is, and that is part of the treatment that goes on to get them back to respecting their own authority more than projecting it all on you. And so it's important that you are clear what the contract is what the client is wanting from you and that you are willing to give that. An example is I had a man come in and his goal was to learn how to control his wife more because she wasn't acting the way he thought she should. And he wanted to learn some techniques so that he could better control his wife. And I had to explain to him that was not my job. My job was to give him feedback about how he was controlling himself and respect for his wife. And he wasn't interested in that. So I was not the right practitioner for him. And I had to make that clear right from the start, and we did not continue. In terms of self-disclosure, there's a distinction between sharing something about myself that actually is useful and helps the client, or am I dumping on the client, just venting some of my own unintegrated emotions and leaving them holding the bag. I have to be very clear that my sharing is in integrity and for their good, not for me to be expressing and releasing my anger or fear or grief or whatever. And so it's very clear, I think, to everyone, the guideline is to not be expressing your sexual needs onto a client, or touching or in some way your needs for sexual fulfillment from your client. I think that's clear to us all. However, it can be more subtle at times to what's the difference between just being friendly and what the other person may consider flirtatious behavior. I may feel totally comfortable with it, but I also have to be sensitive to how my clients are perceiving my behavior with them. We also have to be clear about cultural differences. And this is where I have learned a lot from working with you all and with Omar. There is a woman who came to my training last year from Saudi Arabia, and she married an American. But when we did the wet breathwork session, this was wet breathwork. I was careful to separate that only women were in the swimming pool with a group of women, and the men were only with a group of men.